at one of these events before. I've been mainly involved in the grassroots level of this campaign, which I feel Yes really offered. I've been involved in radical independence in Edinburgh University for Yes, and that's my background really. I'm going to start on why I came to independence. And the reason I came to independence was because I was really sick of the Westminster rhetoric that was telling me and my family that this was as much as we should ever expect, that this austerity level is what we should just sit and face in reality. As you'll all be aware, the UK is in an economic crisis, and this is not a crisis that was caused by single mothers, by those on benefits, by the immigrants or the poor, but they will be the ones blamed for it in the UK. This is an economic crisis that was responsible by bankers and irresponsible politicians who are responsible for the problems that are paid for by the most vulnerable in our society. The British state is structurally reproduced to keep a marginal group in the comfort of hegemonic power. Punishing the poor for the mistakes of the rich is the economic crisis of the UK, and it is why I'm voting Yes. I'm going to vote Yes because Westminster is completely out of touch of reality from ordinary people. It seems of little concern to them that today 5 of British families have the same wealth as 20% of the entirety of the UK, or that a lack of corporation tax leads to a loss of the exchequer of £120 billion a year, or that, even more horrendously in my view, 10,800 citizens have now actually died as a direct result of the ATOS disability assessments which they endorse. You know, it is the audacity of the British state to perpetually demonise working people and scapegoat immigrants and the poor, when it is they that have allowed a situation where 1 in 5 children are now growing up in poverty. So for me, I do not think we are better together. The No campaign, to me, offers nothing but an unbending commitment to cuts, privatisation, corporate hegemony and endless austerity. The No campaign is backed by the UK establishment and led by big business, and has launched a shameful campaign of fear into Scottish workers. Their main aim is to frighten us into rejection independence. Their core message is that we cannot do it alone and we just have to sit and face reality. And it reminds me of Scottish Labour leaders Joanne Lamont's statement that what we really need to do in Britain is to end this something for nothing culture. Essentially, they're saying to us that there is no alternative for austerity. The reality is that no matter who wins the next general election down south, the victimisation of the UK's most vulnerable is going to continue. And what is it that Westminster can really bring to ordinary people that means we must stay with their expertise? There's 29 members in Cabinet and 23 of them are personal millionaires. I actually agree with Lamont. We do need to end this something for nothing culture, and it will begin by the financial elite who will stop getting their gain off the backs of Britain's most vulnerable. It's time to stand against the grotesque economic and social inequalities in an independent Scotland. We can start to reverse the trend by having a smaller country that puts social policy and equality at the forefront of its policies. We have a chance to say we stand for something different. And in this opportunity, young people have some of the most to gain. And in this, I would like to comment upon what Tom said, bringing up the point about how universities will be funded. Personally, university fees is something I feel really strongly about. I feel that it should be free and open to access for all. I feel that Tom's statement that we need to accept that international students' payment of this is a normality is actually quite disgusting to the working classes from across the globe. We should not rest on neoliberal practices to fund our universities. We should be practising the use of proper corporation tax, of removing Trident and using the money that would be funded for renewal to fund our universities. Basically, how can people even hope to go to university in this country if 1 in 5 of our children are growing up in poverty anyway? So, we could be securing, as I said, free university education and boosting career opportunities at a time when Westminster is jeopardising the future of Scotland's young people by frightening benefit cuts targeted to under 25s. Another reason to vote yes, I feel, is that every single party that is pro-independence is talking about bringing back the post-study work visa, and none of the free parties down south are. So I feel international students should really welcome independence, especially as the UK is debating whether they even want to be within Europe or not. And the rise of UKIP within our nation doesn't paint a good picture on that debate. So instead of internalising the No campaign's Project Fear, let's start reclaiming the kind of society we do want to live in. Let's use the opportunity for independence to start creating a vision for the future which is inclusive for all of our society members. And this brings me on to my final section, where I would like to encourage us all to think about how Scotland could turn from unionist fear and scapegoating to a country of hope, both internally and overseas. Scotland has the opportunity to break up British imperialism, to be a nation that stands in solidarity with the oppressed, instead of the hegemonic, Western-centric domination of this world. Scotland has been calling for an end to brutal immigration practices since Holyrood was founded. But Scotland's powers in this area are extremely limited. The policies enforced on asylum seekers, on immigrants in our countries, are the ones that Westminster endorses. If Scotland had control of its own immigration policies, we could put an end to the horrific Westminster practices of dawn raids, of imprisonment of refugees. We could stop breaking up families just because they were born in different countries. We could open our country to the great international talent that is drawn here, and we could forge a new, socially minded foreign policy that is inclusive for all. So, I would like to conclude by encouraging everyone on a personal level not to let the people in power tell you that this is how it's supposed to be. I would like to encourage everyone to be very careful and watch the arguments of people that have a vested interest in keeping the status quo and inequality of the UK the same. I hope that I've been able to convey to you the deep social and political and economic inequalities which the British state will continue to reproduce, and show you the vision that is being created within the independence debate, and that with a yes vote can turn a hope into a reality where we distribute wealth in favour of society's most vulnerable, where we put future generations of this country first, where we become an internationalist player on the world stage, and that finally the decisions that matter most are in our hands. In independence, we can look forward to a fairer, more equal future, which is inclusive for all of our society's members, not just the marginal. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm going to go for the bar stool position. I think we should do all our public debates around independence like this. If only we weren't so far apart. I feel very distant here. Hello. Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here tonight. Can I first of all welcome the Radical Independence Convention and everything that you're doing to campaign for a yes vote. The reason I say that is because I can tell Amy that you passionately believe in what you're arguing for. The only problem I have with that is what you're arguing for isn't on the ballot paper in September, because your vision for independence is very, very different from Alex Salmond's vision of independence. Because Alex Salmond's vision of independence is built on retaining the Queen, retaining the pound, retaining the Bank of England. In fact, he says it's a historic occasion, but not very much will change after all. But why is that, though? That's because Alex Salmond and the offer in the white paper is about getting as many people as possible, as close to a yes as possible, and just pushing them over the line. So, let's talk about what we really want. I'm interested in a positive debate about what our society looks like, what our country can look like, and I'm going to talk about that tonight, actually. Tom did a really good job of laying out the Better Together case, but I want to make a slightly different speech tonight because I speak for Labour in the Scottish Parliament on education. I've spent a lot of time recently thinking about our education system in Scotland, what's good about it, where it fails, what we should do in the future, and I want to share some of that with you tonight because I think that's core to the type of country that we want to be. But before I get to that, let me just say to you first and foremost, I did not come into politics to defend the union. I am not a unionist. I've never defined myself as a unionist. I came into politics to fight poverty and inequality. I joined the Labour Party when I was 22 because I saw what a Labour government were doing in our country to reduce the child poverty rates. A Labour government that brought in a national minimum wage, that brought in progressive anti-discrimination laws, that did so many good things in the late 90s and early 2000s. I was inspired to be part of that and inspired to see the type of change that Labour government made right across the whole of the United Kingdom. Decisions made for the benefit of 60 million people, not 5 million people. That vision of how our whole world could be better. And I won't say tonight that we are too poor, too wee to be independent. Scotland absolutely could be independent. I just don't think we should be independent, and I want to make some arguments for that tonight. So I said I've been thinking a lot about education. In the February parliamentary recess, I went to Finland on a fact finder, as I call it, to go and try and find out what the education system in Finland was like. And if you've got any interest in education policy, you'll know that Finland's school system is regarded as one of the best in the world. So I wanted to see those schools firsthand and see what Scotland could learn from that. When I got there, I was really, really surprised to learn first and foremost that their independent status as a nation had nothing to do with it. I did 8 meetings. I went to 2 nurseries, a visit to school. I met the head of the Teachers' Union. I met the head of teacher education at Helsinki University and numerous other meetings as well. And every person I met, I asked them, you know, Yes Scotland campaign say the key to your success as a nation is the fact that you're independent. Do you agree with that? What do you think? And all of them shook their heads. And they said, no, no, no. What happened post-war in Finland was we decided that we didn't have oil like Norway, we didn't have diamonds like any other country. All we had was our people. And we decided to invest in our people instead. And a national consensus around education was born post-war in Finland. They decided the best thing they could do was to invest in their people as a nation and invest in their education system. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from Finland in that regard. In fact, they talk about it as a spirit of togetherness. That's what they call it in Finland. There's no politics in education in Finland. You've got 8 political parties, 6 of them are in a grand coalition in the Finnish parliament, and the Labour party's in power there, and the only ministry they have is education. There's no politics in education policy. They have decided as a country that's the #1 thing they can do to lift their nation, and yet they squabble around the sidelines, but fundamentally everybody agrees that education is the #1 issue. They've got the best schools in the world, and they recognise the power of education to liberate and to equalise. We used to believe that here in Scotland too. Yet last week, if you look at the newspapers, you can see that there's been a 300% boom in private tuition in Scotland, and 95% of that came from the state sector. That's people, middle-class families predominantly, who send their kids to state schools, worried about their kids' chances and bringing in private tutors. Average families spending £1,900 making sure their kids are ready for the exams. Now, if you come from a poor background, and Amy made a very good case for working-class communities in Scotland, you can't afford to spend £1,900, and that's just for 1 hour of 1 subject class to get you ready for your exams. But that's what's happening in Scotland just now. And education has always been devolved to the Scottish Parliament. It's always been independent of the system. Educational inequalities are at the heart of what we should be talking about and debating about in this country. And unfortunately, the constitutional debate so far has created no space for that whatsoever. Tom talked a little bit about universities too. Let's talk a wee bit more about that. We've got 5 of the best universities in the world. We've got 5 universities in the top 200. I'd like to see more Scottish universities in that category, and I'd like to see the 5 that are there higher up the list. And the blunt reality is that we get far more than our population share of research grants than we should. It's 13% of all research grants in the UK come to Scotland based on an 8% population share. Why is that? Well, 1, we've got excellent universities, but 2, we're built on the principle of collaboration. The University of Edinburgh and the University of Sheffield regularly win incredible grants around chemistry and do world-leading, amazing things. That money will not be there if we become independent. That's not fear, that's not scaremongering. It is the blunt reality of having UK research councils and no longer being part of the UK. You withdraw from the UK, you withdraw from UK-based research councils. That's just a fact, I'm afraid. There's no 2 ways about it, and nothing Mike Russell says can be any different. I've got a funny feeling that Amy's a feminist, and I'm a feminist too. And at the heart of my politics is a principle around gender equality. I want to see a Scotland which is equal for women, and because we would all benefit as a consequence of that. We benefit socially, politically, and economically if women had a more equal role to play in our society. It's no accident that childcare is now at the forefront of our independence debate. Alex Salmond has finally discovered women and has come up with some policies that appeal to women, and his answer to that is childcare. He sees votes in the childcare agenda, not the ability to transform Labour women's lives. Labour politicians have been arguing for progressive childcare policy for decades and will continue to do that. We recognise that if you get women into work, you lift children out of poverty, you improve the attainment of children, and the whole of society is better off. We do not need independence to do that. It's about political will. It's about deciding as a nation that women can play an equal role in our society and allowing them the chance and the opportunity to do that. The jobs of the future will come in STEM subjects. science, technology, engineering and maths. And if you're in this room, you most likely study at this great university who is world leading in a number of these subjects. Right now, the number of women studying these subjects is small and it's falling. If we don't address that quickly, we will close off the jobs of the future to women, and we will not be able to compete as a nation on the world stage for these jobs and this expertise. We need a knowledge-based economy and we need equal access to it. That's not a debate about independence, that's a debate about national priorities. What frustrates me is that the constitutional debate brings our argument down to yes or no, binary decisions, you're for us or against us. All the nuance around political debate, all the ideas, all the imagination can be found in the grey area. And for me, the constitutional debate is closing all of that down. We are losing the ability to imagine, to think differently, to challenge the status quo and come up with new ideas. I believe that we can have a fairer, more equal society. I just don't think the answer lies in changing the Constitution. Thank you.
Kezia will close the case for the opposition. So just before I open the debate to the floor, I'd just like to remind you that if you were tweeting, the hashtag, it's not popular to tweet, the hashtag is EdDebates. EdDebates. Or you can send a tweet to the accountants on the board. They both come up here anyway. So does anyone have any questions about students and education? Anyone? Yes.
Hi. I know that to begin with, Sam did say that they have sole legal advice on this question about whether or not the rest of the UK students will be allowed free tuition, and he said he sought legal advice, which was that no, they wouldn't have to be given free tuition. I was wondering if you thought that it's right that he can say this without giving any sort of evidence, so far as my understanding, of course, and whether you could expand upon his answer to the question.
Yeah, I don't know you understand. I don't speak for Alex Salmond. I'm sure there are a lot of references to him tonight, and Kes only made 3 references to Alex Salmond. That's quite low for most speakers from Better Together. Normally it's 10 or 12 at least in the first minute. What's key about this is it's not that I think that there's an absolute certainty about it. What has been put forward is that there is an arguable case, an exceptional circumstances case for why Scotland could charge students from the rest of the UK to study here as it once become an independent country. Now, there's no way of knowing for absolute certainty whether that would stand up or not until we become independent. The really regrettable thing in this, and it's something Amy touched on, is the problem for Scotland is we live next door to the country that charges the highest student tuition fees in Europe. That's what's at the heart of this problem. £9,000 a year, up to £9,000 a year. It's worth bearing in mind an awful lot of the people who are arguing against independence in Scotland now, including people like the CBI, whom I was listening to on the radio this morning, also argued strongly against devolution in 1997. Lots of them did, and lots of the people who are in the Better Together campaign are people who were against devolution. If we'd voted no to devolution in 1997, we would all now in Scotland, you would all be paying £9,000 a year in tuition fees to attend this university. So it's worth bearing in mind that when you take powers into your own hands, when you get to make decisions in Scotland, we tend to make better decisions. I don't know, I can't give you a legal opinion, I'm not a lawyer. I think the case I've seen for continuing to charge students from the rest of the UK, regrettably to charge them, because it's the only way to avoid a mass exodus of students from the south fleeing these ridiculous and extortionate tuition fees, which would swamp Scottish universities. There is a reasonable case to be made. We would have to see whether or not it succeeds or not. I'm told there are other avenues and other possibilities if that main argument was not upheld in the European Union. But I mean, I come here as someone who attended this university. When I attended this university, there were no tuition fees, and you got a small student grant for being a student. I think it's a matter of deep, deep regret that so many people in my generation who benefited from free university education are happy to see the current generation having to pay through the nose and run up huge debts to come to university. I think it's one of the most shameful things about my generation and the way we've handled this issue.
Just of interest, what proportion of the population went to university?
It was a much smaller percentage, that's true. But here, this is an absolutely true point, Rory. When I went to university, it was like a lot of people of my age. I was the first person in my family to go to university. I left school and worked for 3 years before I went to uni, because that's the only way I could afford to do it, even with a small grant. I've pals at school who were bright enough to go to university but didn't go because the family needed a wage, so they didn't come. So even when there were no tuition fees, and even when you got a small grant, it was still the case that people from disadvantaged backgrounds didn't come to university, weren't able to come to university. Now, it's true that a much higher percentage of people come nowadays. I've always been of the view, I don't think coming to university is an absolute right. I do think it's a privilege. And I do think that I always felt as a student that I was being, society was investing in me. And my responsibility was to come to university, work hard, get educated, come back into society, and society would get the benefit of the education I had. So I do think it's a privilege rather than an absolute right. But I absolutely think it should be about ability to learn and not ability to pay.
So Blair says we make better decisions in Scotland. Now the Scottish Parliament are the ones that abolish tuition fees. Surely we should give them more powers.
Can I answer that and address a bit of Blair stuff too? You know, like I speak for Labour in Scotland in education, I said that earlier, and it's fair to say we've had numerous positions on tuition fees since the Parliament was established. And let me try and tell you why that is. We sweat it on tuition fee policy. Why? Because it's free in Scotland, that's right. I paid tuition fees for the first year of my university. The Scottish Government at the time scrapped them in my second year of university. I didn't pay anything after that. And then I paid for my master's. So I've got, you know, a mixed experience of that. But the bottom line here is we have free education just now, but we have the worst widening access record of any nation in the country. We have the worst student support package for the poorest students. And we have the highest dropout rate of any nation in the United Kingdom. All those things are facts. I can provide you with the sources for all of that. So I'm left thinking, who's it free actually for? And the reality is in Scotland is it's largely free for the privileged middle class. And the people who don't get to university, people from working class communities around Scotland, tend to go to college instead. Well, they used to, until the current SNP government cut places in colleges by 37%. Basically, a third of our college sector has been wiped out since 2007. Now, I'll give you another statistics. That fact has particularly impacted on women. There have been 93,000 fewer places in our colleges each year for the past 5 years for women studying part-time. So we're talking about 400,000 fewer opportunities for women to study in our colleges. So if we really care about changing our society and helping women get back to work, surely we want to give them the education and the skills and the ability to do that. They can't get in the college door. So the Labour Party looks at what the SNP government has done and says, okay, well, they've kept university tuition free and we would love to keep it like that. But look at the consequence. The consequence of that is a decimation of further education and a door closing in the face of working class students. So I'm struggling just now with the tuition fee question and how we fund our universities and our colleges. I spend night and day on it, but you have to understand the Labour Party's struggle with this issue is one that is set against the principles of fairness and justice and equal access to education. It's all very easy for the Yes campaign to say it will be free in an independent Scotland, but free for who? When will we get working class kids into our universities on an equal basis as everybody else? Surely that's what should drive us when it comes to education policy.
We've had a tweet saying, how do you pay for education without international student fees? Someone else saying, especially as the SNP is advocating tax cuts that attract international businesses. Do those two play hand in hand, especially with the radical idea of independence?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Obviously, as Blair's pointed out, neither of us are speaking on behalf of Alex Salmond or indeed the SNP at all. There's many other levels in this debate. In terms of, as I said, the Radical Independence campaign, we strongly put forward a case for social progressive policies which include universally free education for all. I don't see it as a difficult one personally, that we can offer free education. Denmark does it, Norway does it, and really we could just be changing our economic system. We could be getting rid of Trident, as I said, which puts forward £4 billion a year of renewal that we could put towards universities. We could be putting proper corporation tax in place so that we don't lose £120 billion a year on that. There's ways that we could do this.
Would you agree that the white paper says, though, that we'd be committed to a 3% reduction in corporation tax?
Oh, no, I do. Yeah, that's an SNP policy. I'm not SNP at all.
To be fair, the SNP are the party who are the main drivers behind independence, and they're the ones that
that's
come
not
to
who's going to be in.
their views have to be taken into account when
fair.
considering this issue. Sure.
Yeah, I could finish what I was going to say by...
Right, so it's in the white paper. It says in the white paper you'll cut corporation tax. I bet we agree that more tax is a good thing, but the reality policy as they offer in the white paper is to cut tax. So how are you going to fund the services?
Just to clarify, I don't agree with everything that's in the white paper. There's other parties that have put their own manifestos forward for independence. And obviously we all have our own visions. I don't think that this debate should really be run on the basis of what we see in the white paper, what SNP has said, what Yes have you said. What can Westminster actually give us as an incentive to stay? We can sit here and debate all day about what will happen after independence, but there is only one guarantee that will be happening if we stay with the Union, and that is further austerity measures, that is further cuts that will disproportionately affect women and working classes that we're already seeing in society. I agree that the working class is the biggest factor that we should be considering when we're talking about access to education. Coming from a working class background, I was often pushed to university because now that's been seen as how you deem your success, your university level. It comes from Thatcherite era, pushing in corporate levels of success, and this should change. We should reclaim a culture which doesn't depend on how much earnings you have to determine your success. This is something very important. Yeah, I see that we need independence to move away from this kind of rhetoric that Westminster trickles down to all of us. Yeah, that's my point.
We've had a tweet come in to the No campaign saying, by suggesting the white paper is all there is post-Indy, surely Kezia has already admitted defeat in the 2016 election.
How do you mean?
Well, if you're saying that the white paper is what is going to be implemented after there is a yes vote, then surely that's suggesting that the SNP would win the election after that.
That's the SNP government's proposition for independence. It's the white paper. It's the blueprint. It's the thing you print before you print the Independent Scotland Bill. Like, why would the government spend all the money it has and produce a booklet 650 pages long if it didn't propose to have all the answers?
That's disingenuous, Kev, because you know perfectly well the white paper contains two different kinds of content. It talks about the things that would happen in any independent Scotland constitutionally and what an independent Scotland could do. A cut and corporation tax, which is not a policy everyone would agree with, could only be introduced by the Scottish Government after Scotland became independent and after the first election to the Scottish Parliament in 2016. So the point Rory makes is absolutely correct. The particular things in the white paper that SNP policy are subject to this is not a big secret, it's actually spelled out in terms in the paper. They put two types of content into it. One is to say what an independent Scotland could do, the powers that would generally be available to an independent Scotland, and then they said, because people wanted concrete examples, here are the things that an SNP government would do, here are the kind of policies we would implement if you elect us in 2016. 2016 is when we decide on policies. What we do later this year is decide, are we going to continue being run by a Westminster elite, is that where the power is going to sit, or do we take power to ourselves? That's what we decide in September.
What we're talking about all this is political decisions as taken by political parties. It's got nothing to do with the constitution. And Amy speaks with a lot of passion about a lot of these issues, about you talk about universal for education, things like that. Blair has, sitting to your right, has just said the only two options in an independent Scotland, so it would be a first government, would be a Labour government or an SNP government. Neither of those parties is bringing forward anything that you just said you wanted. So where does independence get you? It's like, where does it deliver your vision? And this is where I think that the Yes campaign kind of grabs onto the radical independence for the support, but that's not what's on offer. What we have, why we talk about the white paper, is that's the blueprint, that's what we should get, and that's what we should go.
Okay, yep, we've got a question up there.
Hi there. I'd like to point out an observation very quickly, which is I've heard, I've been something very involved in politics, and thousands of debates with speakers, listened to thousands of debates in Parliament, and yes, speakers, and every single one of them promised to spend private money on a variety of fantastic social measures. However, if you actually listen to Keith Brown, who's the Minister for Transport and Veterans, who's got part of the SNP and is a defence spokesperson, he said every single penny from private we spent on the Scottish Defence Force post-independence. So that money is not there for university education, for childcare, or anything like that. The point I did want to make, though, perhaps not moving on to education though, that as a socialist and somebody So Westminster is not elite. Westminster is not an elite system. There may be people there that people vote for.
So, in other words, do socialism and nationalism go hand in hand? Or do they go against each other?
I disagree on the idea of whether Westminster is an elitist system, but you're talking about whether socialism can complement nationalism. Of course it doesn't complement nationalism. I'm not a nationalist. This independence debate for me is not a case of nationalist whatsoever. I'm an internationalist, and I feel that independence, far from a nationalist agenda, could actually bring us into a socially progressive international stage, like I said in this. It could accommodate better for immigrants, it could accommodate better for asylum seekers, refugees. We could start to look outwards in a socially progressive manner, instead of upkeeping British imperial rule in other nations, where we go into illegal wars, where we send our troops into countries that we should never be involved in. So I really feel that actually socialism goes hand in hand with the independence debate. Of course our concern will not end at a border, as my concern does not end at the UK border. It goes internationally, it goes overseas. I feel that with independence, it's not a case of leaving people behind in England, not at all. In England, they have an 85% population majority of the UK, so really, none of the Scottish votes in the UK government are actually making any difference. We're not leaving anyone behind, we're just moving into a better future. Hopefully with independence, we could work together with the UK government and try and pressure them to change some of their policies as a sovereign nation. So, yeah.
Well, can I just come back on that very quickly?
Yeah, of course.
Every political battle has ever been won. The women's movement, the movement for greater equality in terms of redistributing wealth, the peace movement, the environmental movement. There have been political battles that we've fought on the road. And you know what? The Scottish Parliament of 1707 is not the Scottish Parliament today. It's held with landowners. Scotland is not this more progressive nation. There's 500,000 people in the last election voted Tory. It's currently, people in Scotland could vote Tory in 2016 when there's nothing stopping it. It probably would happen, but it's still
That's not going to... Well, I think, to go back to that point, I think if you can find me a single academic, a single political specialist who predicts a Tory victory in the 2016 Scottish, I'd love to meet that individual, because I'm not sure what they'll be taking, but probably hallucinatory.
In 1951, we predicted, which is the last time the Tories got a majority vote in Scotland, we predicted we'd be having this referendum. None of them would. You can't predict 60 years into the future. We're talking about the entire future basis of our country. It's not about the next election.
No, but I think that the point still remains, Tom, is perfectly valid one. The direction of travel of Scotland has been very clear for a long time now. There are particular circumstances about votes in the 1950s which are thankfully not replicated in the early years of the 21st century. The truth is, we will get the chance to choose the kind of policies we want in 2016, the kind of government we want. It won't necessarily be an SNP government. It's just as likely, or, as I said, the two outcomes are potentially, or likely to be either an SNP-led or a Labour-led government. I actually personally will say I thought some of the things that were in the red paper produced by the Labour Party the weekend were pretty interesting. I think for the first time we're beginning to see some of the things that a Scottish Labour Party might do with the powers of an independent parliament. You're beginning to glimpse that things could be a bit different from the way they've been from the Labour Party at a UK level, at a Westminster level for a long time. It's one of the things I believe in this debate. I think Kez is wrong to say that the constitutional debate is some kind of distraction. What's happening is, all around Scotland, people are talking about policies. People are thinking about the kind of country we should be and could be, where there's a much more vibrant and active debate which is bringing in more and more and more people, which we wouldn't be having if there wasn't an independence referendum in September. For far too long, people in this country thought, to use an old-fashioned expression, that there is no alternative, that we were stuck with different variations of neoliberalism with Conservative governments and Labour governments which were angling for votes in the southern half of the UK. Now we know that there are different possibilities, and I think it's very, very exciting how many different voices are coming forward in this debate.
Can we take a question in the middle?
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to say, someone said that what Amy's points were saying, that that's not what Alex Salmond's written down in the white paper, which is possibly, true, it isn't what he reflects. But I think we're focusing here on too much about parties and things. We've got to remember that this is an opportunity for change. It's not set in stone that that's what you'll get in independent Scotland. Also, I'd like to note that as far as I'm aware, I think we'll have a proportional representation voting system used if Scotland were to be an independent country, as opposed to a first-past-the-post system. that sort of system creates coalition governments. So, in your position from a Labour Party, it might be able to form coalitions with different parties within the Scottish Parliament. So these sort of values that are like what Amy was talking about equality, justice, inclusion, social inclusion, these sort of things, considering, most people have been saying that we won't have, or it's unlikely that we'll have some sort of Tory representative in Scotland or in Scottish politics. If we have coalitions of all these parties coming together, I feel like the things that Amy was talking about, I feel like those things are quite possible. It's not something that we have to focus too much upon between party politics. I think the idea here is that we have an opportunity.
One more question? Yep.
Yeah, I am from the southeast of England, and I am also very much boring. I was just wondering, because in these sort of social attitude surveys and other examples where Scottish people have been surveyed and like their attitude, haven't been that too divergent from the rest of the United Kingdom. And I was wondering if you could sort of specify what specifically Scottish values mean and why they are so much better than people from where I'm from.
Well, we never say, just pick it up and Amy may have a different answer from mine. It's not. I don't think it's to say that they're better. I do think that Scotland makes different choices. And that's reflected in voting patterns. It's reflected in the parties that we vote for and the manifestos that those parties put forward. I think if you look at the things that the Scottish Parliament has done since it came into existence, or came back into existence in 1999, the policies have been pursued. Free personal care for the elderly. We've touched on free tuition fees. I think the maintenance of not charging for medical prescriptions, I think, is a very important policy to maintain. There are lots of things which I think the Scottish Parliament has done, and not just, and it's an important point, not just the SNP government. The Labour Lib Dem administration that preceded the Scottish National Party administration did a lot of really good progressive things. We do make different decisions. I think, you'll know better than I the reasons for this. It does seem to be the case that a different view has been taken in the southern half of the UK about what priorities are, and whether your priority should be individual ability to make wealth and to generate wealth for oneself, or to take a more collective view of society. What we know for a fact is under successive UK governments, Labour and Conservative, we've had this enormous disparity of wealth and opportunity. Since 1975, the gap between the richest and the poorest in the UK has grown wider than in any other developed country on the planet. And that's not by some act of God. That's as a result of deliberate policies pursued by successive UK governments. And that's how we've ended up in a position of being such an unfair and unequal and socially unjust society. So, I've spent time living in Newcastle and Manchester, and I know there are other parts of the UK where people would have political views which are probably not too dissimilar to a lot of views that are held in Scotland. But I do believe that we have an opportunity in September to begin to say there are different priorities that you can pursue as a society and as a people, and I do believe that we can set an example not just for the rest of the UK but for other countries as well.
Then we'll come back to that.
Yeah, I can do a bit of that. Again, I really respect what Amy's got to say, but there isn't a majority for Amy's view across the country. There isn't a majority for socialism in Scotland. There isn't a majority for a tax increase in government in Scotland. So what I'm warning against, and I take your point about political parties, and it's not really about political parties, but what I'm trying to say is I'm warning against this idea of false hope. That you vote for change, that you vote for socialism, for a tax increase in government, and then you don't get it because the majority of people in Scotland don't want that. The majority of people have exactly the same views as people across the whole of the United Kingdom. The Scottish Social Attitude Survey tells us that our attitudes towards welfare and immigration are almost identical. We are slightly more European than people down south, but that's broadly the only difference that there are between us. The BBC did a survey of the top 20 programmes people watch in Scotland, so the top 20 programmes people watch in England, and they're exactly the same. So much of our culture is exactly the same. Come right back.
I was going to say, I see what you mean, but in terms of that though, it kind of comes back to the point that someone was making that there's no alternative. I feel like people in Scotland have had it drummed into them that this is the only thing we can do. We have to have austerity. I think I heard that the IMF actually said to the Chancellor your austerity measures, your cuts are actually, too severe. That's not necessary. And I feel that the reason why perhaps these opinion polls are saying that people in Scotland, their views reflect people in England as well, is because it's been ingrained into us. And I think if people maybe listen to things like radical independence, or maybe, we try to campaign at grassroots levels for people in working class communities, maybe to open people's minds up, make them see an alternative side. Like, I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't want to listen to what you had to say. So I think that, it has to be some sort of social mobilisation, because I honestly don't think that everyone in Scotland has the same views as everyone in England.
Can I ask you another question? Say you wake up on the 19th of September and the country's voted no, which is, right now, a fairly realistic proposition based on what the opinion polls are telling us. Are you going to give up hope in politics? What are you going to choose to do?
No, as an Irish and a law student, I definitely wouldn't give up hope in politics. Considering the alternative, which would be Devo Max, I'm assuming that's what we would get, I would try my best to campaign for the most progressive things that we could, as close to what we could achieve through independence. Personally, that would be my...
It's not just all about independence. There's hope beyond the constitutional debate.
There is, but I think there's a better means to it. I think Devo Max is in some ways, and that's a whole other debate, but I think through independence, I think that is the best means to achieve social equality and essentially change from what the status quo currently is.
But the powers you would get with a system like Devo Max, you would want to see used. So you'd get powers over tax. You'd want to see those powers used, right?
Well, I think that's obvious, but
the rest of the country doesn't agree with you. The rest of the country doesn't want to have.
Well, it does, and come back to the point of social mobilisation. People have been ingrained with these views. They've been told what to think. There's no alternative. Perhaps, if we try and socially mobilise people to realise that, are you happy the way this is? No, I'm not. Well, what about this way? Here's another way to do it. Opening up the debate, not just to people sitting like us in university, but people who are working or on minimum wage, or horrifically are in poverty. Those are the people that maybe perhaps should have more opportunities and a stronger platform to have social mobilisation, in my opinion.
Basically.
I'm not, I think that's kind of weird.
Yeah, basically.
I think on the ground, what I sort of saying is like the most important decision they've had for 300 years, or we've had, I'm going to include myself somehow, 300 years in Scotland. And essentially responsible to go on, both of you talking about how the SNP's policies are really bad and the SNP's campaign is really bad. I'm quite happy to concede that the SNP has run a very, very disingenuous campaign in terms of things like saying we can use the pound after election, we'll get currency. I'm not entirely sure why that necessarily means, though, that we should vote against independence. I think you can quite happily say the SNP has run a bad campaign, we don't agree with what the SNP has to say, but as Blair says, after independence we've got a further choice about what's going to happen in Scotland. It doesn't have to be the SNP policies, it might not be what the SNP is proposing at the moment, it's still probably comparatively better to remaining in the Union.
Take one more question.
Okay, so one thing that I think is really important to note is that it's quite easy to say, oh, we would do this, the SNP would do this, Labour would do this. But the fact is, whichever party is in government, they're going to face constraints on what they can do based on economic and political circumstances. So given that, how is it going to be possible for Scotland to necessarily be more socially progressive, given that they're going to face the same constraints on spending and taxation that every other country does in Europe? You can't make yourself Scandinavian just because you really, really want to.
Obviously, but you can change the taxation system.
I don't know whenever to come into this thing, because I don't really like interrupting people, but it seems like this is what we have to do. But yeah, okay, I'm going to first tackle in order. So basically to bring up Nikki's point, which I think is a cracking point that needs to be discussed, the social mobilisation of people that have systematically been left out of politics in this country. I think that it's been one of the most positive aspects of the pro-independence campaign to get out on the street with the local communities that throughout decades and decades of Westminster rule have only been referred to in the demonisation, have only been referred to when it's a victimisation of cause. My family comes from Wester Hailes and Claremston. The only time anyone speaks about politics is to talk about when we've been continuously screwed over by them. And this is why, again and again, people are so disillusioned to even engage in the political idea. And I think to pick up on what Kay said about whether we're truly different in Scotland, I don't think on the ground we're truly that different to anyone down south. I mean, I've got so many English friends and we all have the same political ideas, so I think that statement's ridiculous. But I would agree with what Blair says, we make different political choices. And this is why the rise of UKIP is down south. This is why Tory governments have continuously been voted in by the English population. This isn't a negative reflection on citizens down south, this is just reality. And so when we're talking about the social mobilisation of people in this country, it's people like the working classes, people like immigrants, women that have continuously been left out of this debate, that are now having a voice in independence, that are now creating a vision for the future that is socially progressive. We can't get away from that. Sorry, I completely forgotten what your question was after that. Sorry, can you repeat it? Oh, what a comment. Measures that the cuts are too harsh in Britain. This is not a level that we have to live under, but it's something that we've internalised, that we've become normalised to, that we think that this is the status quo, but it's not. This is only what needs to happen if we're going to continue to structurally reproduce a group of people in an elite position that have the 1% majority over the whole of the 99%. So these are austerity measures taken to uphold a certain neoliberal practice, but if we change to a different, move towards a different economic model, then such cuts wouldn't be necessary. These are necessary to run our country. And so basically, I would like to finish just the point and reiterating what the man in the back said, that of course the SNP policies are different to my own, that basically strike a chord with these austerity measures, but I don't think this debate, as many of us have said, as I've said before, are about what the SNP puts forward. I think this is about an opportunity and a vision for something different that we are never going to get with this union, an opportunity for socially progressive values that aren't going to come with the UK. And so I would like, the people on the Better Together side, maybe instead of talking about how we can just never get what we want in this reality, how we have to just accept what's going on, why should we have any incentive to stay with the UK? What is it that the UK is doing that is benefiting the most vulnerable in society?
It's staying with the UK.
Just no matter saying people you can't do that. It's not what we said. I think what Kay said in the previous answer was really good. So this was the way the majority of it. This was the national minimum wage, which was just in, last time was 200 years. And the reason we're focusing on this is, look, it's the first government, it's going to be the first people there negotiating the settlement. It's going to be huge influence in shaping the entire future of Scotland between the Scottish government. So I think we've got.
That is the point. It will be the SNP government who are negotiating the term if there is a yes.
But you can vote them out.